This event is open to the media, but you're more than welcome to stay for the presentation, but we ask that you contact us directly if you have any points you want to discuss about content covered or requests for an interview. So with that, we'll get started. My name is Allie Boyd. I'm the Director of Human Rights and Advocacy here at Border Servant Corps, and I'm joined by Kyle Boyd and Kari Lenander, who will also be presenting today. But to begin, I want to start with a little bit of an overview of Border Servant Corps. In case you are new to our community, I just wanted to kind of locate us in the work that we do. So we operate in 2 states. We are the largest 24/7 shelter in the region. We operate out of Las Cruces, New Mexico, and El Paso, Texas. In total, between the 2 different states, we have 4 locations. We have the Las Cruces Hospitality Center. We have our El Paso Hospitality Center. We also in El Paso have our port reception site, which is at the port of entry in downtown El Paso. And then we have our El Paso Airport Navigation Team that we're so proud of because they welcome migrants on both sides of TSA. So they help folks who are navigating an airport or even a plane ride for the first time get to their gate safely and understand how to go through TSA, et cetera. We're also really proud of some milestones and statistics that we've reached in the last few weeks. So we just welcomed our 150,000th guest. She was a 3-year-old little girl from Venezuela, and we've welcomed 150,000 people since the fall of 2021. And to that point, we've welcomed folks from more than 79 countries around the world, with our most recent country being Equatorial Guinea, which is a fun fact. So this presentation is, of course, going to touch on a little bit of an election debrief, just given the administration change that is coming. I know that folks are seeing new headlines every day. It's an intense time for a lot of folks, especially people who work with immigrants or immigrant serving organizations. So to kind of parse through the headlines, I wanted to focus on 3 main pillars of what we expect to see with the new administration in 2025. And as you can see on the screen, those are mass deportations, the Alien Enemies Act trying to be utilized, and birthplace citizenship stripping and denaturalization initiatives. So first and foremost, with mass deportations, as you probably know or can imagine, the cost of deporting up to 1 million people a year is going to be astronomical. The American Immigration Council, an immigrant advocacy group, estimates the cost of deporting 13 million immigrants in the US, here undocumented, would be about approximately $968 billion. NPR did a great day one, what it would look like, and we're going to drop the link in the chat for you. And it really laid out what are the mechanics of a mass deportation starting on day 1 of the Trump administration. So first and foremost, Tom Homan was named as the border czar. The first thing that they proposed to do is cancel humanitarian parole. So people that came through the CBP-1 app that we discussed in the last teach-in and through the CHNV program, which stands for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, and also TPS, or Temporary Protected Status. So they want to do away with all of those programs. We also expect that they would change guidelines for deportation, meaning that they would go after and arrest anyone and put them into deportation proceedings. This is different than a Biden administration because the Biden administration really focused on folks with criminal convictions. They had a very targeted approach to who they would put into deportation proceedings and would prioritize folks based on criminal history. That would change under a Trump administration, whereas everybody would be eligible for possible deportation. So they would be casting a much wider net. We also, unfortunately, are going to see workplace raids ramp up. Right now, that was not happening for most of the Biden administration, but we'll see the opposite of that under the Trump administration, where they are going to go after workplaces and where folks are congregating. And the unfortunate part of that is with the workplace raid, you might separate families, you might leave kids unattended, kids are at school, mom was picked up in a raid, and they might not be there to do carpool pickup or get them from school. So we're going to see possible family separation under the workplace raids as well. And then we also expect them to expand detention facility use. Right now, we have a mix of private prisons and government facilities. It's unclear if they're going to be able to expand using federal facilities, but the private prisons will definitely be in use. But a couple of things to remember with the mass deportations is that it cannot ramp up on day one. So a deportation operation targeting millions of people requires a lot of personnel. Right now, ICE, as it is understaffed, especially with correctional officers. So they're going to need more ICE agents to be able to carry out their plans. They're also going to need more detention beds and immigration court judges. In addition to this, they're proposing using soft-sided tents to house people, to hold them. And believe it or not, these soft-sided infrastructures do take time to build. So again, you're not going to see this on day one. You're going to see a ramping up over weeks and months, but not day one. Something else that is just interesting to note is that countries have caps on how many deportation flights they will accept. So countries will not accept unlimited deportation flights. And I see some of you nodding your head, so you're very aware of this, which is great. And then interestingly enough, despite promises, Trump's first administration only deported 1.5 million people total in 4 years. So again, it's still tragic and unfortunate that many people were deported, but we're not looking at anywhere near the numbers that they're projecting they're going to deport in the coming years. I also want to move on to the Alien Enemies Act. This is a little obscure, but bear with me because you might have heard this in headlines and in the news in the last few weeks, especially. So the Alien Enemies Act, believe it or not, is a 1798 law that gives the power to the U.S. government to hold people who are foreign nationals living in the United States. It was designed to be used for war or intense conflict. The law permits the president to target immigrants without a hearing and based only on their country of birth or citizenship. So that would basically mean that they get to override due process. They could detain and deport people faster by using the military to round up people. However, to use the Alien Enemies Act, there needs to be a declared war from Congress or a presidentially identified invasion or incursion. It's unambiguous from history that this refers to acts of war. It cannot be a rhetorical device that Trump can use to refer to cartel invasions or a migrant invasion. It's very clear from examples in history like the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II, when the Alien Enemies Act was invoked, we were in a clear conflict or war. And for example, it was used after Pearl Harbor. So it was used for something as severe and historic as Pearl Harbor. It was not used for immigration. If they do try to use the Alien Enemies Act for immigration purposes, we would see mass internment of immigrants. But the good news is that this is going to be litigated in courts. So if they try to use the Alien Enemies Act, you're going to have immediate opposition, filing lawsuits, folks fighting this in court. So it would be held up in court and in litigation for some time. And it would matter if you were in a red state or a blue state because it would require cooperation from state authorities. So you would be slightly more protected if you were in blue states. And then lastly, I want to touch on denaturalization and birthright citizenship initiatives. So as I'm sure we're all familiar, birthright citizenship is guaranteed to us through the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, and it is given to any child born within the United States. So to revoke this would be a very big deal. Revoking this would require amending the U.S. Constitution or for the U.S. Supreme Court to go back on centuries of established precedent. So it'd have to go back on itself and rulings they've already made. And these principles of birthright citizenship date back to before the founding of the United States. So very long held tradition and right protected by the Constitution. So it'd be an uphill battle, but it could technically be possible depending on how the Supreme Court perhaps would rule. And then one thing that's also being talked about quite a lot is this initiative of denaturalization. So in the final year of the first Trump administration, they created a new section within the Department of Justice focused on denaturalization. That means just revoking the citizenship from immigrants who became U.S. citizens through the naturalization process. So they are U.S. citizens. However, the denaturalization section was created in February of 2020, and its intent is to target, quote, terrorists, war criminals, sex offenders, and other fraudsters who illegally obtained naturalization. So they want to bring immigrants under this really specific umbrella, and they want to widen that umbrella to include immigrants, unfortunately. And Stephen Miller has gone on the record saying he wants to turbocharge denaturalization. So that's the bad. The good, or the silver lining, is that we're already seeing civil rights and human rights groups mobilizing to protect the most vulnerable. I have just a few examples I pulled from the last week here. So you might have seen in the New York Times, the ACLU, or American Civil Liberties Union, ran a full-page ad in the newspaper saying, in part, "We are not moving to Canada. At the ACLU, we play the long game. We've been around for 105 years and seen 19 presidents come and go." So we already have organizations like the ACLU ready to protect civil liberties and civil rights of people in the United States, including immigrants. And then in the middle, we have KIND, which stands for Kids in Need of Defense. They work with immigrant children, and you can see from their posts that they are ready and committed to protecting unaccompanied and separated children, should that come to pass with the Trump administration. And then lastly, I have a post from Earth Justice. So not an immigrant rights organization, but an environmental rights organization. Again, just pointing out that they litigated against the Trump administration and won 85% of their cases. So again, there are incredible organizations, both civil rights organizations, human rights organizations, earth rights organizations, that are mobilizing, among others, to protect the most vulnerable in our communities. So with that, we're going to focus on what Border Servant Corps looks like for the road ahead for us. And I'm going to turn it over to Kari and Kyle for this slide.
Thanks, Allie, and thank you everyone for being here with us today, and to those who will see this in the future. So we're just we're just going to go through some of the steps that we are going to need to be taking as Border Servant Corps after the election. One of the pieces that we have seen after the election is a drop in sponsors for our migrants that are coming through. So everyone that we receive at this point is coming through CBP1. They've had an appointment. They have an appointment in the morning. They're processed by customs during the day, and they're released to us at our port of entry site. We've seen the sponsors or the points of contact drop. I think that's not really surprising, probably to most folks, because it's not unlikely that our guests are received by a variety of communities around the country. So one of the things that means is usually sponsors or points of contact help purchase travel tickets for people to get to their final destination. That is shifting now, and our capacity in our shelters is much. Our shelters are much closer to capacity than they have been for a while, because people are needing to stay longer to try to find resources to move on. And then they also have to figure out where they're going to move on to. That's going to be a safe space at this point. And so not something that we had totally anticipated, but we're working with cities and states in safe places across the country. And if folks know of places or might be in places where they'd be able to welcome some families into safety, because staying in Texas is not a good idea for our families at this point. Between everything that Texas has been doing, now the federal government will be in alignment with Texas. It's going to make the challenges for our guests and their exposure that much greater. So just to put that out, that's something that's started within the past week, and we anticipate we're going to see that increasing as we get closer to Inauguration Day. The other thing that we're seeing is, or that the other decision we're having to make as an organization in order to continue to serve the folks in this region is we're having to make a strategic withdrawal from Texas into New Mexico. So at the end of this year, December 31st, we will have withdrawn out of El Paso, and we will still have our hospitality center in Las Cruces where we will be serving folks. But in order to continue to have these services available in the most protected way possible for the people that we're serving and for the team members that are doing the service as well, that's one of the decisions that's needing to be made. Going alongside that is CBP1 that we've talked about is one of the first pieces that's on the chopping block for this new administration. They have said it pretty darn clearly pre-election and definitely post-election as well. That CBP1 will be one of the very first things that will go away. So what that means for us, we had seen in our region, right, in the El Paso sector, all of New Mexico and West Texas, pre-executive order this summer in June, we had received people in the triple digits, right? 300 people, 400 people a day from Border Patrol. After the executive order for the rest of the summer and early fall, that number dropped drastically to be in the double digits. We were collectively receiving 12 people, 35 people. Now, since the election, it has dropped a digit again, and we have received single digits. I mean, collectively in the region. So yesterday, there were 4 people released from Border Patrol custody. Today, there were 8 people released from Border Patrol custody. This has not affected the number of people that we're receiving through CBP1. That has remained constant, and we've heard from our DC partners that it will stay the same until Inauguration Day. But we fully anticipate that on January 21st, there will no longer be the option for people to come in through CBP1. And if people are not being released through Border Patrol, that will significantly affect the folks who are coming to seek safety. For the next 3, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle, our Deputy Director, to share with you all.
Good afternoon. So, like many migrant serving organizations in this new world, we're looking for any mission that we can do to help to continue to support migrants in whatever capacity that is. Supporting migrants in Juarez during the last administration was an extremely important thing. One thing that BSC did participate in then, and we're going to be continuing to look at ways to do that. And there's going to be other things that come up as well, such as families are going to be left behind in the wake of deportations. And what is that going to mean in our region? And also what's it going to mean nationally? And how do you support those migrants? And that was point 5, moving along at a rapid clip. And then to point 6, New Mexico and West Texas are always going to have a border with Mexico, regardless of who the governor is, regardless of who the president is. And so we aim to continue to build up resiliency in both of our communities so that in the absence of federal support for another surge in migration or any kind of migration-related events along the border, that our communities will be in a stable place to be able to assist them and keep the community impacts at the lowest level possible. I want to go back and address a question that was in the chat about the closure of Vista Nueva. So getting back to the point 2 about a strategic withdrawal to New Mexico is that unfortunately, because of the legal situation that's continuing to develop and will continue to develop with the next legislative session in Texas and the probable inaction of SB 4 this spring when the Trump administration drops prosecution in the 5th Circuit, We are strategically withdrawing to New Mexico, but we're strategically withdrawing with the intent to be able to continue to provide the same type of service to the region that we have the entire time from the safety of a blue state, with hopefully with the support of other NGOs and even the state government of New Mexico. We know right now that other governors are looking at ways that they can combat initiatives for the new administration. And we expect that New Mexico will be right along with them in doing that. And we want to be an integral part of figuring out how that's going to work. So we definitely don't want anyone in the El Paso region to think that we're retreating from New Mexico. What we're really doing is we're building up our ramparts so that we can continue to stay safe in the face of what's coming both in Texas and the United States, and provide those services from a safer space in New Mexico, which fortunately isn't very far away. And that's it.
So some of the things a lot of folks have asked questions about, what can people do? We are doing the most that we possibly can to try to have fully available EAD clinics, employment authorization document clinics, for adults to get their work permits and for children to get their Social Security cards from now until the end of the year. So really there's a matter of, 6 weeks left before the end of the year. So we're calling on lawyers and accredited representatives to come in and help us run those classes. We've done this since March, and I've already had thousands of people come through and take these clinics. It's available to all of our CBP-1 migrants, and USCIS provides people with expedited work authorization. So they get it in their hands within 30 days, which is really why the push is until the end of the year, and hoping that even for those who submit at the very end of the year, that they will get those in hand before the inauguration takes place, which just adds another, potential safeguarding layer for the guests that come through the region. Another piece that we're looking at is, as we start to draw down in Texas and build up in New Mexico, we're looking for volunteers, local volunteers, or folks who are willing to come down for 2 weeks or more in order to really help with this transition, and then the ongoing efforts that we will have even past January. There are two campaigns that are coming out. One is a Good Gifts campaign around the holidays. If you all are familiar with Heifer International, it's similar to that, but it's really meant to help support our migrants, whether they're in the U.S. or post-January 2021, post-January 20th, if they are right across the border in Juarez. People will be in our region, and our intent is to be here to support them. And then the last piece is we'll be rolling out a permanent home fund to really solidify and stabilize these services, specifically in New Mexico, for the foreseeable future, but particularly necessary, obviously, with this upcoming administration.
Okay, so with that, I just wanted to show my contact information. There was a question in the chat if the PowerPoint was going to be available, and absolutely, if you want to email me, I'm happy to share it. And as Ben noted, we do post all of our teach-ins on our YouTube page about a week after we conclude, so feel free to reach out that way, via email, or check our YouTube page. I'm going to end the recording, and then we can address some of the questions in the chat.